Well, I've been involved in student ministry in universities around the world for the last 40 years. I've been leading an organisation called the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, which serves Christian student groups in about 160 countries around the world. So we see many influences through the graduates of the student ministries in society. I think of one young woman I know was called Anna, who lived in La Paz in Bolivia, which is the highest capital in the world, I think. And she studied to be a pharmacist in university. She couldn't find work afterwards. There were jobs in short supply. But she found an independent pharmacist in a very poor part of the capital city. But people were not treated very well. The poor were abused, really. Abortion was widely practiced. And it wasn't a great place to work, but there were no other options. So she took a job there and worked for 6 months. After 6 months, she went to see the owner of this privately owned institution, and she said to him, I can't work anymore here because it's against my Christian principles. I can't support abortion. I think you're abusing the poor here. I'm going to have to leave. At which point the owner said to her, look, please don't leave. I've been watching you for 6 months. You're different to anybody else I've ever employed. I really respect what you stand for. If you stay, I'll make you the director of the institute and you can do whatever you want. That's 20 years ago. She's still running it. Abortion is no longer practiced there. Now the children are adopted or cared for in other ways. People are treated with dignity, and now it's like a shining star in the capital city of Bolivia in Latin America. What I think of another friend who was from the country of West Africa, from Guinea-Bissau. His name was Procel. He came to study in Portugal, where he became a Christian. As a young lawyer, he returned home. And as often happens in African countries, he was promoted very quickly. He became the assistant to the chief legal officer in the country. At the time, the president was a dictator. And as the church was beginning to grow, some of the advisors around him said, the church is growing, why don't you try to bring in a law to restrict the freedom of worship of Christians? He said, okay, let's do that. He asked the chief legal officer to draw up the law, who delegated it to Procel. Procel was 27 years of age at this point. He went to see the president. He said, sir, I respect your authority, but I've been asked to draw up a law which restricts the freedom of worship of Christians. I can't do it. You must do with me whatever you want. The president was so impressed by him, he scrapped the law. 10 years later, he asked him to be prime minister, and he turned it down. I said, Procel, why did you turn down the offer of being prime minister? He said, I didn't want to be in the pocket of the president, Lindsay. But the president said to him, okay, if you turn down the prime minister's office, you can have any other job in government that you want. Just tell me what it is. He said, okay, give me complete control of all communication in the country, newspaper, radio, and television. And that's the job he holds today. So one Christian, rather like a kind of Daniel figure in that situation, has a profound impact on the culture. Third one is a guy from Northern Ireland I knew called Sir Fred Catherwood. He was the son-in-law of Martin Lloyd-Jones. And in the early 1990s, he was the vice president of the European Union. At that time, when the Berlin Wall fell, the whole of the Soviet Union disintegrated, became individual countries, including Russia. And at that time, there was a President Boris Yeltsin in the country. And the system in Russia is that if the parliament passes a law, the Duma passes the law, it goes to the president, who then signs it into the statute book. Under pressure from the Russian Orthodox Church, a law came to the government to restrict the freedom of worship of evangelicals. That's basically Pentecostals and Baptists. It went through the parliament and came to President Yeltsin. Fred Catherwood at that time was the go-between between the European Parliament and the Russian government. He flew in to see the president, went to see him in the presidential palace and said, sir, I respect your authority, but I'm asking you not to sign this law into the statute book for two reasons. Christians in the country are committed to the country, they love Russia, and they want to see it prosper. Secondly, if you do this, you'll damage relationships irreparably with the European Union. I suggest that you do not sign it. Yeltsin scrapped the law. I visited the country 10 years later, and evangelical Christians told me the church had grown by at least 5 times in 10 years, and they had unparalleled religious freedom, which they'd never experienced before. It was all because of one Christian politician who, rather like Daniel, went into the country and argued the case for them. All those three stories highlight to me how individuals in different spheres of life, whether it's pharmacy or political life or anywhere else, can have a disproportionate impact on the advance of the gospel and the application of biblical principles if they stand up, are counted, and are faithful to God and his gospel. And there are many stories like that all around the world. I've written about many of them in a book I wrote called Shining Like Stars, if you want to access some of those stories and read them for your encouragement yourself.